I'd like to welcome you to this installment of the Technology and Culture Seminar Series. Our speaker today is Jessamyn West. She is a librarian and a technologist, and she's here today to speak about the topic of her most recent book, which is The Digital Divide. Please join me in welcoming Jessamyn.
Hey, and thanks. Let me know if you can't hear me or anything else. Everyone who does some kind of technology stuff usually has some sort of a hobby horse, a thing they really care about, a thing that they'll talk to you about even if maybe you don't want to talk about it, and this one is mine. So I live in the middle of Vermont, so Randolph, if anybody knows Vermont, but Vermont's a rectangle and I live right in the middle. I'll show you a little bit more about that in a second. But my background is library stuff, and where I live, the library is sort of what you think of when you think of kind of old school library, like it's a box with books in it and really nice ladies who will help you find stuff. And it also has computers, but it's got like 2 or 3 of them. They're mostly downstairs in the teen section, which is awesome, but you can't, if you're somebody who lives in that area and you don't really know how to use computers, you kind of can't learn to use a computer at the library, which is too bad because, as I will talk about, it's really kind of the only place where you can learn to use a computer in 2011 if you live in central Vermont. So in addition to occasionally filling in at the library, I also work at the local vocational high school. After all the kids go home and there's a whole bunch of big empty rooms with computers, I go in there and basically hang out in the afternoons, a couple days a week. We do this thing called drop-in time, where I sit around in a room. It's got computers, it's got internet, and people from the surrounding communities come in and basically ask questions. Because one of the things that we're finding, and this is what I'll be talking about, is the problem of how you learn how to use a computer if you don't know how to use a computer and you don't know anyone else who knows how to use a computer is a big problem when it seems like it should be a simple problem. So I'm going to talk a little bit about sort of why that's true. I went to library school in Seattle, in the University of Washington, kind of a big city, and when I'm sorry, is that funny? Go, go? Yeah. Go Huskies? Okay. Also, good point, if I say something that seems like blah, 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 and suddenly you have no idea what I'm talking about, you can just kind of wave or something. There's not that many people here. I'll be happy to backtrack and explain a thing, though you'll probably know what I'm talking about. Anyhow, I went to the University of Washington. I have a master's degree in librarianship, which is what they were giving out back in the Stone Age when I went to library school. And when I graduated, I worked for Seattle Public Library for a while, teaching kind of my first email classes. And I figured, you know, this is great. You teach my first email classes because it's 1996, and eventually everyone gets an email account. And then we go teaching stuff that's more sophisticated, like social media strategy or how to make videos or whatever the stuff is, web design. And then I moved back to the East Coast and realized that it's going to take a really long time to get to the point where everybody even knows how to use email. And what you guys have probably heard, which we hear in the library a lot, is people aren't even learning to use email. They're going straight to Facebook or straight to whatever, the beep, 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 Twitter's stuff. And they're skipping that point altogether, which is sort of true, but it's sort of not true, and that's exactly what I'm going to basically start talking about. And so as librarians, this is becoming kind of our problem to solve, which is really kind of weird because it only sort of seems like maybe that should be our job. So I'll talk a little bit about kind of what the setup is, what we know about the world of technology already. First things first, everybody thinks they know stuff about technology. If you talk about sort of conventional wisdom, you'll find that people have lots of different ideas depending on what kind of data they have. I'm really interested in sort of fact-based approaches to this stuff, only because I feel like everybody's got a story, like, oh, I remember a guy, you picked up the mouse and did this, and aren't people ridiculous? And while that kind of stuff is true, and it's worth understanding how people use technology, it's also worth understanding where that stuff comes from. So everybody's got some kind of an anecdote. Most people have a local library. You guys, public library card holders, all of y'all, most of y'all, the rest of you are going to work on that, right? Yes. You know you can get cards if you need a public library, right? It's very cool. Okay. Some people understand where libraries get their money. The thing that's really weird is that depending on what state you are, the public libraries may get their money from completely different places. So in Vermont, we're one of 8 states in the country where there's no state funding for libraries. So the Vermont Department of Libraries is kind of a nice bunch of people that have a bunch of meetings, but they don't give money to any of the public libraries. So every year the librarian has to go to town meeting and basically explain, you know, thanks for the money you gave us last year, we've spent it, and unfortunately, you know, we have to go buy a new computer, or my health insurance has gotten more expensive, or we have to buy 3 new copies of Windows Vista or Windows 7, so we need a little bit more money than we did last year. Thanks. And if the town thinks your library has value and is worth it to them, they'll give you that money, but if they don't, they might not. Massachusetts actually has a state board of library commissioners. Funding is slightly different. Every state is slightly different, and how you get your money sort of depends on what you do. Some people understand things like IMLS, which is the Institute for Museum and Library Studies, and they give a lot of grant money, sort of top-down grant funding for stuff, like technology, like programs to teach you how to use the computer to look up certain things, whatever. Big grants. And ARA, American Reinvestment and Recovery Act, I think some people call it Obama money. A lot of that money went to libraries to do stuff, but it only went to libraries to do stuff depending on whether states applied for that money. Talk a little bit about that in a second. So some states are like, we got tons of ARA money to do stuff, and other states are like, we didn't. And if you're me, it looks like everybody got money to fix bridges and stuff in Vermont, which is great news, but doesn't necessarily help the broadband problem. And a lot of people kind of don't understand that there is a national broadband plan, or how it's implemented, or how it works and why. So if you're looking into that landscape, you're going to look at something like broadbandmap.gov. Has anybody looked at this website? If you're curious, whether there's broadband where you live, or maybe where you're from, because if you live here, you got broadband, right? But maybe you're looking at getting a job somewhere, or maybe you're looking at moving somewhere, and you're like, I need internet where I'm going. And like in Vermont, this is like a thing. Like you have to think when you go rent an apartment or buy a house or whatever, am I going to be able to get internet there? Because if I can't get internet, like, I don't know about you guys, but like I can't move. Like, I just have to stay put. I live on the main street, and that's where DSL goes, and I may not be able to get off that main street. So I went to broadbandmap.gov, which is essentially a big website where you type in your zip code and say, internet, and you get something like this. And this is where I live in 05060. This is data as of middle end of last year. And it's cut off a little on the side, but you don't need to really see this stuff on the side. What you can look at is like, it's a big red box. You're like, well, that looks good, right? And looks like something net communications, SovereignNet, offers like 25, 50 megabit, right, to the house. And you're like, yeah, I can live there, except I do live there. And what I know is they don't have 20 to 50 megabit to the house. I may be able to pay some internet service provider multiple hundreds of dollars a month in order to get some sort of internet, but this sort of stuff is not conventionally available, and broadbandmap.gov actually deals with data given from the internet service providers who have a vested interest in having things appear a certain way, if that's probably the most polite way I can put it. So they would like to look like they are servicing the people in 05060, and I know that maybe they're not doing as good a job as they say they are, but you know, no big deal, whatever. So I typed this in and got this and was like, well, that's not really true. But again, like everybody's got an anecdote, right? So let's look a little bit more. If you go to recovery.vermont.gov, now this was a thing, and I'll explain what you're looking at, but this was a thing where if you were applying for ARA money, the Obama money, if you wanted it, one of the things that you had to prove was that you needed it. Like, you gotta need to be recovered from something, and maybe you're fine, and so we'll give the money to people who need it. So this is looking at actual availability, and the people who put together this map needed to look like they needed broadband. So, and what are the different colors? I'll show you just a sec. So the little circle up at the top, that's where I live. The colors are right here. So black means 100% of the people in that area are serviced. So if you notice, I live on kind of a little black island surrounded by places where people have somewhere between 0 to 30% saturation of internet. Now this could be people who both opted not to get internet, and we'll talk a little bit about those people, but also people who just plain old can't get it. So I live in Orange County, which is the smallest county in Vermont, and I live in the biggest town in the smallest county, which means we've got internet and we're surrounded by people who don't, which means all those people come to our town to use Wi-Fi, to go to a public library that's open more than 12 hours a week, that kind of thing. And the white areas reflect census block. Whatever, there's a couple towns that nobody lives in, is what that means. It's really weird, but we have a couple towns that have populations of less than 5, which all I want to do then is move there and be like population number 1 on the sign, except I don't have the internet. So I can't. And so, this is supposed to make the stimulus money people look at us and be like, oh, those poor people, let's get some internet to them immediately. And so you can see the same spot on the map, a little different color, slightly less rosy picture. And so let's look at Massachusetts. How many people here are actually from Massachusetts? 1. Can you see where you live on this, where you grew up on this map?
Yep.
So again, the maps that you get, so if you go to the National Broadband website, the maps that you get, information from the providers, and a lot of times the information comes in like separate maps. So here's a map for the wireless options. Here's the map for the wired options. Here's the map for fiber only. Here's the map for cable and fiber, and you kind of got to make a flip book and put them all on top of each other to figure out what it really looks like where you are. But this is sort of what Massachusetts looks like. Over here where we are, lots of internet. Over here on the other side of the country, or on the other side of the state, only DSL, I know, right? It seems like the whole world. Down there in Martha's Vineyard, Nantucket, not so much. And then, if you dig a little bit deeper, you wind up with this big thing that says, oh, by the way, while we say you have service, it's really just based on census data, which means if one person in your census block has something, they act like everybody's got it, which is kind of weird and sketchy, but like that's just how it works, and you just have to know that moving forward. So every state does their own mapping, and every state does their mapping differently, which is kind of interesting when you're looking at Vermont and Massachusetts.
Do you know how big census blocks are, like relative to postcodes? Like, are they? I just don't know if that's small or big. Like, how many people
Well,
would
like
be in a census
Randolph
block?
has 3,
Okay.
I think, or 4. So often they're smaller than a small town.
Okay.
So the granularity is more than towns, if that
Okay.
makes sense,
Yeah.
not less. I mean,
Okay.
I'm sure Boston has. But they're roughly analogous to postcodes,
Okay.
but not exactly. But then there's the post office consolidation, which is a whole other
Okay.
crazy mess.
Okay. I just don't know whether it was like huge and then like,
Yeah, no,
or
smaller,
tiny.
smaller than towns,
Yeah.
usually. And you can go, there's a really wonderful mapping. I can't remember the URL off the top of my head, but it's great where you can type in your postcode and get which census blocks are near it,
Okay.
and it'll show you the outlines of them, and then you can do number crunching. Very exciting. So every state does their own mapping, and so if you're one of these people that like lives on the border, have you ever been anywhere where they have to like plow the roads in the winter, and you are on a road and it's totally clear, and then all of a sudden something happens and you pass an invisible barrier and all of a sudden the road is completely horrible and you're like, what happened? And somebody's like, you drove into the next town. Because all the towns just plow right up to the end of their town and then they go back. Internet can sometimes be like that too, especially on state boundaries, and it's really weird. So, talking about what the digital divide actually is. Digital divide is kind of a catchphrase or a buzzword that people use often when they're trying to sell you something, whatever that means, and usually they're trying to tell you about it because they're trying to tell you how they fixed it. Like the digital divide, it's just people who don't have a computer, we gave everybody a computer and now we're done. It's not quite that simple, and usually what it refers to is the fact that there's a gap between the people who have the stuff, the people who don't have the stuff, and it inhibits the people from being able to cross over and learn it because they're stuck in these sort of pockets where nobody knows how a thing works. Used to be, we thought the digital divide was just because people didn't have computers, and now most people in America have access to computers through their public library, although it's different than having your own computer. And then we thought it was because people didn't have computers plus internet. And And now we're at a point in America where about 97% of the population can get to a library where there's internet and use it, which you guys know isn't the same, but it's similar. And that also didn't solve the problem. We're still teaching my first email classes. We've still got people who don't know how these things work. People are sort of scratching their head like, why that's still true. Oh good, this totally works. So, you know, what we're looking at is these sort of numbers. A third of Americans don't have broadband at home. 20% don't have any internet at home at all. Now, some of these people may have internet at work. A lot of these people are the people who I live among. All the librarians that work at my library, besides me, don't have internet at home. Like, to them, they're like, internet's work. Why would I want that at home? And in my universe, that makes no sense whatsoever, but that's kind of the way they're working with it. People who don't have broadband at this point, and I'll talk about this coming up, often don't want it, which is kind of hard to get your head around, but the data seems to be indicating that. And our big question that we ask ourselves in the sort of world of public libraries is, well, what are they missing, and whose job is it to teach them those skills? Because a lot of times what winds up happening is they need to use them all of the sudden when they weren't expecting it. Like, you guys are probably familiar with Hurricane Irene, came through, kind of sucked, wrecked a bunch of stuff. One of the things that really happened in Vermont is, you know, we had a lot of sort of weird destruction and a lot of people who, you know, got flooded out or stuff like that. And one of the things that they needed to do very quickly was contact FEMA, you know, Federal Emergency Management Agency. And you've got two choices, basically, to get in touch with FEMA. You can call FEMA on the phone, or you can get online and fill out all your FEMA forms online. Now, most people, I don't know, maybe I'm overgeneralizing, but I think most people would be like, great, get online, fill out forms. Who wants to be on hold, you know, in my messed up house forever? However, if you don't know how to use a computer, filling out your FEMA forms is a really crappy time to learn how to use a computer. It sucks, and it makes you hate the computer, and it makes you hate technology, and the whole thing is just this tremendous bummer. And so one of the things we think about in the library world is how do we get to those people so they at least have the basic skills before they need them. Similar thing we think about, you know, if you don't know how to drive, no big deal, right? Valid choice. You're welcome to not learn how to drive. But if you don't drive, you may have to get someone else to drive you around. Or maybe you can live somewhere where there's public transportation. That's great, but maybe you might get in a jam. Knowing how to drive, useful. Having to get a driver's license, up to you. I kind of feel the same way about this kind of thing. One of the other statistics that I didn't put on this slide is the non-users. We've got our 21% no internet at home, and I'll talk a little bit about who's been studying these people, but at the point where we are, of the non-users, 1 in 10 of them say they'd like to start using the internet in the future. So we've got 90% of that 20%, you guys are good at math, right? 90% of that 20% really are just kind of like, I don't really care, don't really care. Which, you know, until the point that their house goes away, or they have to apply for a job at Home Depot. Anybody tried applying for a job lately? Internet? Sucks. And the websites are terrible, which makes it even worse, right? Like, you probably know what a good website looks like, and then you apply for a job online, and you're like, this website is terrible. But if you've never seen a website before, you look at the Home Depot website, and you think that's what the internet is. Difficult, difficult. So I was just in Wisconsin, and I pulled a couple things out of the Wisconsin broadband thing that they wrote up. And this is kind of a weird graph and kind of hard to look at. But basically, it's like different regions of Wisconsin. How come you don't have the internet? Because this is really the question, right? Like, why don't you have the internet? Like, you know, I'm a public librarian, so I have manners, but I am always like, really? Really? Like, how do you do all the stuff that I do on the internet without it? And so, you know, asking, how come you don't have one? Well, I don't have a computer. You know, it's a waste of time. And the waste of time thing, I'm surprised how different it is by different regions of Wisconsin. Like, some places are like 30%, 5%. I wonder what specific time waster different groups in Wisconsin do. Too difficult, too much money, and then the viruses and privacy issue, which is huge. And I don't know about you, but I don't think about this that much as like a seasoned internet user. I figure I kind of understand that. But one of the things that we found is that people who aren't online, this is like a big thing for them. one more question. The same thing, like, why don't you have internet? Why would you, like, what would motivate you to get on the internet? So again, well, you know, it might be nice to have a class. It would be nice if I could afford a computer. That's always nice. I'd like it if broadband were cheaper. You see that's the big number at the bottom. And then my favorite, the red one in the middle, nothing. Nothing you could do would get me on the internet. Now that's somebody who is dug in, right? Like, you know, I need a bug for the right price. And all those people are like, forget it, nothing, like, not motivated. And so you have to think, something is keeping these people offline. Or maybe they're just trying to get the, you know, phone marketer off the phone, right? Like nothing, I just don't want to talk about this anymore. And so this is a graph from Pew Research. You guys come across Pew Research. They do a lot of surveys about internet and society. They do a lot of surveys about how kids use computers. They do a lot of surveys. And one of the things that's great about them is they're just a think tank. They're not the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, who, you know, does a lot of really interesting stuff, but they're ultimately owned by the people who own Microsoft and may have an angle. If you're just learning about technology from the media, right? You don't have a computer, you don't have a smartphone, all you're doing is watching TV or reading the newspaper and learning about computers. And this is, you know, the digitally divided people. What are they learning? Oh, on the one hand, technology is making your life more productive. Like, it's great. You can meet friends. You can watch television. You can do stuff. You can meet, you know, cute people of your preferred gender. You can do whatever it is that you want. Like, it's great, right? Why aren't you on the internet? And then you cut down, and the next line is, internet's not safe. And this can mean a couple different things, but what it primarily means is you get online, first thing that happens is someone steals your identity, next thing that happens is someone steals your children, right? And like, that's it. That's just how it works. I saw it on TV. My kid got on email and somebody took her or something. People don't really understand Facebook. They don't really understand identity theft, but they know if they never get on the internet, it's never going to happen to them, and that's their, you know, logical thing. Put another way, I like to sort of explain it with Legos. The whole thing's summed up in basic ideas. One basic idea, which is we know technology can perform magic, and what we don't understand is why it does some kinds of magic and won't do other kinds of magic, and people get very confused. So briefly, I'll talk about libraries and why this is kind of our thing. A couple big things were public. If you're going to solve a problem that affects everybody, you've got to solve it in a way that everybody can interact with. This is why, unfortunately, educational institutions, they're great, but you can't always send everybody through them. Public schooling notwithstanding, like lower public schooling, good. Higher ed, not necessarily overlapping enough with the people that need this. With computers, we have them in the library. You guys may not remember back when we were in this sort of Al Gore created the internet sort of rosy days where there were people speculating that what you needed to do in order to kind of teach everybody how to use technology was make the post office the place where you would go get your mail and your electronic mail. Because that made sense, right? They're the same thing. And so you'd go use a computer at the post office and check your email and get your letters and your bills, and like then you're done. Mercifully, this was a brief, fanciful time. But I remember being, you know, in the library and being like, those guys at the post office, you know, because what happens? Like, we've got all this infrastructure, and suddenly Al Gore's talking about people going to the post office, and you got the feeling he didn't totally understand what was going on. Broadband access, we have it, and staff. The real reason it's us and not the internet cafe is because we have people whose job it is to help you do this stuff. Other people who do a lot of research on this is the American Library Association. You want to talk about people who have an angle? American Library Association. Love them very much, but their job is to make you feel that libraries are important, essential, and basically indivisible from, you know, America, basically. So, you know, they've done some studies. This was one that came out in April last year. There's another one that came out in April this year, but they haven't released it yet because they're trying to sell it to you. 71% of libraries report they're the only source to free computer access in their community and the internet. So it's computers plus internet, right? It's not Starbucks, which has Wi-Fi. It's a place where you can use a computer and use the internet. Libraries, pretty much at. We have to consider the source. ALA would like you to believe that. And the only reason we even have numbers like that is because the American Library Association and Pew, with the other stuff, decided that those numbers were important to count. One of the things that's really hard getting measures of social inequality generally is someone has to decide to count those people before we have the statistics about those people, and sometimes there's not value inherent in making those calculations. So ALA, good on them. And so this is, I don't know, pictured in New York Public Library. I know, isn't it pretty? You can just like walk into that room in the middle of downtown Manhattan and use a computer, and there's never anyone there for some crazy reason. So if you're ever like around Grand Central, I recommend going here. So the big question is, what happens, and that's fine, what happens to people who aren't living the sort of born digital dream? And then what do they do about complicated digital information? So if you're not on the internet, you can't read an ebook, you can't email somebody, you can't, in Vermont, you can't file for unemployment, you can't get a job at Home Depot, you can't apply for the University of Vermont, you can't apply for FEMA without being on hold on a telephone that's busy all the time. There's a whole bunch of like can't stuff, and some of it's fun. You can't look at dumb cat videos on YouTube. You can't, follow the Red Sox on Twitter. You can't, but then there's some stuff that's real and that is approaching what you need to be a citizen in America. You can't watch Barack Obama's State of the Union address on the internet, which is still on TV, but diminishingly, more and more of the stuff that the administration is putting out goes digital. And so figuring out sort of what to do about that, this is the University of Washington, out and out here? Yes?
Yes.
Yes, thank you. At any rate, it's important for thinking about scholarship, and it's important for thinking about the public. So looking at some other examples of like digital divide, what sorts of things happen. How many people here have a Gmail account? Yeah, me too. I'm Jessamyn at Gmail. So, every now and again I try to log into my email, and Gmail decides to ask me if I want to give them my phone number for two-step authentication, which is awesome, right? Like, you leave yourself logged in at the library, and if you do two-step authentication, you can only log in if you, they text you a thing. As you can see, I haven't signed up for it yet. I probably should. So I get to this page on the internet, and Google's like, there could be trouble if you don't give us your phone number. And I'm like, yeah, I don't personally care. But if you look at this and you try to look at this through the eyes of somebody who's not really familiar with what's going on here, what it says is type in your phone number and click the button. Now, I may not want to give Google my phone number for various reasons. I'm not one of those sort of paranoid people, but I'd like to make an informed decision and think about it. What I'm definitely not looking for is a blue on black link that I can't see is a link because it doesn't have any of the common link characteristics except for blueness, which is a little difficult. But me knowing what I know, I can just click that and skip it. Novice users not knowing what they don't know, type in their phone number. Now, Google whatever. You can make the argument that they're fine and giving them your phone number is fine. But every time you have to make a step like this, and every time you have to make a decision about how much of your personal information you want to give to people, different people are trying to make it slightly more complicated for you to keep your information private. I'm not a Google conspiracy person, but I do think people need to be able to choose. Similarly, and this is just an old, dumb example, but phishing stuff in your email, you get something like this in your email. Oh, different computers logged into your online banking. Oh, this is slightly old. Oh, you should probably do this. Oh, you should click here. See that link? One of the things we know about novice users is they don't really know what a URL is. Like literally, they don't really know what a web address is. They don't know that they're using a browser. They don't know what a web address is. They just click stuff and their email's there and it's fine. It's slightly confusing. But they can look at that and see that it says bankofamerica.com. What they maybe can't do is hover their mouse over that link to see that if you click on it, it actually goes somewhere completely different. It doesn't require you to be that technically savvy. You guys probably know how to do it. Somebody reading in their email probably doesn't. And one of the things that happens to me a lot in drop-in time is people come up to me and they say, I got this email from Bank of America that says, and I'm like, first question, do you have a Bank of America account? And a lot of times they're like, no, but, and I'm like, well, it's, and they don't understand how I know that it's junk mail. And I don't understand how they don't understand that if they don't have a Bank of America account, email for Bank of America could be completely ignored. They're like, well, maybe they've confused me with someone who, no, delete it, whatever. And worse yet, if they have a Bank of America account, this is legitimately confusing. The thing that it looks like you're supposed to do is click a link that goes somewhere else. I mean, you guys probably understand how phishing works. But what may not be as clear is how much it works effectively on people who don't understand entirely what they're doing. And last example, I recently bought a plane ticket to go somewhere, I don't even remember, and you've probably bought plane tickets, but if not, whatever. I was clicking through, and you know, it's like, no, I don't want extra legroom, I'm 5'2", no, I don't need special trip insurance, you know, I've got that through my credit card, no, I don't need, and at this point I had already typed in my credit card, clicked the button that said buy it, and then I get this, you know, which is just, I don't know what it is, something, $75, something. They've already checked the box for me, helpfully. What did you say? Sweethearts. I know, right? Like, thank you so much, United, for caring about my legroom for my, 27-inch inseam. That's awesome. But basically, at the bottom, there's what I would be paying. Here's what I would be paying if they upsold me to whatever it is. Confused people, one of the things we know about novice users is they read every page on the internet, top to bottom, left to right. You guys, you all see the button?
On the right-hand side.
And you go to the button, right, and it's always down here after all the text that tells you to do something else. Novice users, they don't. They read everything. This doesn't totally make sense. Again, there's the blue unlinked or underlined link. So you've got to know enough to either unclick that or not go for the lower right-hand link. Yeah, sure, add that option, whatever the heck, $75, whatever. This kind of stuff preys on people who don't understand the systems. And the thing about the divides is that it's not just like, oh, these people just don't know the stuff. It's usually that they have a bunch of sort of compounding things they don't know. One of them, easy, economic. I can't afford a computer. Well, the good news is there's a computer at the library. Oh, the good news is computers getting cheaper. Oh, the good news is there's people like Comcast. I don't know if anybody nobody reads the news about Comcast. What am I even talking about? But Comcast did this thing lately where if you live in certain cities, Comcast will, and you've got kids in the school lunch program, Comcast will give you internet for $10 a month, which I guarantee is cheaper than anybody's internet here unless you're in the dorm. And they'll give you a coupon for a free, cheap $150 computer, and classes, online classes about how to use the internet. So great, right? And Comcast does this whole thing like, we're helping solve the digital divide, we are awesome, $10 internet, whatever. And then when you read the small print, it turns out that this offer is only good for, A, people with kids in school, but that's who's important. But also people who don't owe Comcast any money and who have never had a Comcast account in the past. So if you know anything about people with financial instability, housing instability, that kind of stuff, the chances that people who don't have a lot of money, who are at all interested in broadband in the first place, may not have at some point in the past tussled with the leading internet service provider, you suddenly get a huge eligible group of people that becomes significantly smaller because Comcast ultimately, while they do want to solve the digital divide a little bit, would also kind of like to cover their own butt, I think. And so there's also economic divide, number one. Usability divide, it's the Home Depot page that sucks, right? It's pages on the internet that are trying to make you go in a different direction than you would go if you understood what you were actually doing. One of the things that we know about the people who aren't online is that they're often people with lower literacy skills. 40% of the population in America has low literacy skills, huge group of people. They have other challenges, reading all the stuff, very difficult for them. Seniors, other people with cognitive impairments, physical impairments, you got a shaky hand, working the mouse, difficult, challenging. You've got a bad memory, remembering which stage you are in the checkout process. Challenging, difficult, things we need to think about. And then you've got sort of the empowerment divide. One of the things we know about social networks is 90% of the people who participate in social networks almost don't participate at all. 9% contribute sporadically. It's kind of you guys are familiar with this. And a tiny minority, 1%, accounts for most of the contributions. I don't know how many people like or enjoy Wikipedia. I like and enjoy Wikipedia, even as a librarian. But one of the things that's kind of weird about Wikipedia is even though it's the encyclopedia that anyone can edit, there's really about 1,500 people doing almost all the work of Wikipedia. And Lord love those people. And then there's lots of people who participate a little, but it makes it into a different sort of thing. And so the empowerment divide is all those people who are like, I can't, I don't know how, I would need help, I'm not interested, but you get the feeling that they're not interested because they don't know what they'd be interested in. And then you don't have stuff like this. This was a Manhattan phone book in 1946. This is how to use your telephone back in early telephone times. And it's nice, right? There's actually a list, and you can actually learn to use a telephone if you follow these steps. Try this for a computer. Like, open it up and either press the button that's on the top or in the back or on the side, and then you'll either have to log in or not, and then you have to click on the E or the Fox or the O or the multicolored dot or the thing. So the rules used to be a little linear. They're not so much anymore, so even providing a toolkit, challenging. So this is my favorite part. These are the things we think are true because they seem true, but the data seems to not actually support the things that we think. So my favorite one, what needs to happen? I know, right? What needs to happen is everybody over 50 or 10 years older than me basically needs to drop dead, and then we're fine, right? All you guys are set, right? Well, here's the problem with this. And I have a slightly complicated little picture. So in rural areas, which is where I live, right? I mean, forget the fact that it's completely unkind and we don't say these things out loud, but in rural areas, really all the younger generation really are just coming up through school and learning technology in school. It's just true. The older generation has me. Really, most of the people I work with are somewhere between 75 and 90. I set up my landlady with, like, she just bought a new MacBook, and we got AppleCare for her, and I was, like, setting it up for her, and I was like, you're going to have AppleCare until you're 90 years old. Like, there's something kind of cool about that. And, she's trying to figure it out. She still calls Firefox Godzilla because somebody's called it Mozilla at one point, and she thinks that's hilarious. And she calls my drop-in time flop-in time because, the root thing goes both ways. But basically, that's me in the country, right? In the country, that's true. In the city, what we're seeing is, and what this is showing is people with money. This is how many people had broadband in 2006. This is what we're expecting in 2012. If we look at the people without money, this is what we had in 2006. This is what we had in 2012. It's 20% less. And they've explained this. This is New York City housing. Let me see if I even wrote this down. People need a citation. I have it afterwards. But one of the things that they found that happens in urban areas, because everybody in an urban area, for the most part, can get broadband if they can afford it. It's available. However, one of the things that they found is urban areas often contain pockets of people from other countries. And people may have low literacy skills, they may have low technology skills, whatever, and they live in communities with lots of people who are like them. Great. That's sort of, melting pot. Awesome. One of the things that winds up happening, though, is the people who achieve technology skills, who kind of learn more stuff, get more skills, get more English, have a tendency to leave those communities. Not always, but often, especially in subsidized housing. And they're replaced by another person, their age, who has low skills again. So instead of people getting older and older and older, and eventually people who don't have the skills leave, you have people coming in from other countries who are continually replenishing the low skills people, and then you have these pockets of low skilled people that kind of stay that way. It's an oversimplification, like many things. But the urban digital divide is different, and we can't just rely on people dying off to solve the problem for us. I mean, a lot of what I wind up talking about, yeah?
The divide decreased by 8% over this time. Is that a general trend that you've been seeing?
Yeah, one of the things that we're finding finding is wealthy people and less wealthy people are getting closer to each other in terms of what they have. Because ultimately, if you're like a super rich person and you're a super broke person, you still, if you get a computer, have something that gets you on the internet. It's not like there's super internet. I mean, there kind of is, I guess. But it's not like there's super internet and then broke person internet. Like once you're on, you get a certain level of stuff. Although there is dial-up, which I don't even hardly talk about anymore, but where I am, most of the people who are having technology problems is because of dial-up, which is depressing. But yeah, the gap is closing, which is awesome news. And one of the biggest things we find happening is those are all the people kind of who want it. And then we've got the chunk of people on the top, rich people and broke people, who don't want it, which is sort of an interesting question. Next thing isn't about old people, it's about young people. You kids, I know how you are, you're all born with a chip, you have a cell phone, you're all beep, beep, beep all the time. I know how you are in class, and you're all plugged in, you're all talking to each other, and this is what they tell us in the library world. You go to library conferences, you sit around, they talk about the born digital generation. You guys don't know any world before the internet. True? Maybe?
Pretty much.
What?
You got no world before the internet.
Yeah, but just barely, right? Well, see, I'm curious, right? Because in the library world, one of the common myths is kids today just expect to have the internet at all times, and so anything you do that's not on the internet is dead to basically younger generations. Doesn't even need to be kids today. And so again, looking at some of the data, this is teens and cell phones. So younger than you, teenagers, little kids. And who's using the phone and what are they doing with it? This is, I'll have to look up where this comes from too. But so 75% of teenagers own cell phones. So that's interesting. I think that number is actually smaller than you would think. And so what are they doing? Well, 72% are text messengers. So this interests me, right? 3% are not text messengers. Like, what are they? I don't understand. But 54% text daily. I mean, 33% of teens send more than 100 texts a day. And then I don't know about these kids, 11% send more than 200 texts a day, which I'm flabbergasted by. But the thing that's so interesting to me is while all these kids are like texting each other all the time, right, with the beep, 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 and hey, how's it going, and LOL, whatever, these kids who don't have phones aren't talking to any of those other kids. And so you wind up with this kind of chatting gap over here, and then these people who are in some ways disconnected from these people. Now, it's not like the kids with the phones don't talk to the kids without the phones. It's not some kind of weird, crazy thing like that. But you have to think about it. If you're communicating using Facebook or using your phone or whatever it is, anybody who doesn't have a phone isn't in your circle of people who you're talking to. I mean, I still have a couple friends who like really don't use email. Like I'll send them an email because, you know, email, as we know, is for old people like me. And I'll send them an email and then I'll get a phone call because the email thing really isn't their thing, which, you know, fine, whatever. But that's because we've sort of already decided that we are friends and that's how we're going to get along. And it's a little weird to me that they don't communicate in my medium. And again, with the kids today, not all of them are the way people tell us they are, which is with the beep beep and the born with the chip. And yep.
So these are SMS messages, not just like generic text. So like, do Facebook messages count for these or Twitter?
No, this is SMS, right? Sorry. So SMS, right? And then the other thing, question. So these statistics, I mean, these are like from last year or like, you know, 9 months ago. Like I don't even. It's all changed, right? Like everyone's on the internet now. Like they weren't in 2010, but they're online right now, right? So this is, you know, again, statistics, this is Pew again. And let's see how this stuff's changing, right? So 2004, 2005, tons of people getting on the internet. Or percentage change, up. 5 and 6, up. 6 and 7, kind of a dip. 7, 8, 8, 9. And then 2009, 2010, we're seeing fewer people, percentage-wise, who are actually attaining broadband. What we're finding is that gap.
What is the basis?
The
like
basis.
percentage of what?
Percentage change in home broadband adoption.
So like out of all the people in general, or like based on who already have broadband, or
Proportion of the remaining.
proportion of remaining?
I think when I read it, and now I'm trying to like remember. I've got a link to it we can look afterwards, but when I read it, I felt like it was percentage of people who don't have it
And
who
how
are
many-
thus getting it from them.
Okay. So not only is like the pool in absolute terms probably getting smaller,
Correct.
the actual percentage change is also getting smaller. Okay,
Correct.
that's where I was after.
Yeah. Yeah, sorry, statistics. But yeah, it's fewer and fewer people who don't have it are getting it. And that number is shrinking. So that the number we like to toss around all the time is the 21%. 21% of everybody has no broadband at home at all. And we keep thinking like that's going to go to like 10 any day now, right? Because like everyone wants internet. But that number is shrinking. In the last year and a half, we saw it shift from 21 to 20. Like it's just not, people aren't stepping up. Now part of that is because they can't get it, but part of it is again, the people who are like, nothing would convince me to get it. Or they can't afford it, or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So the change is not happening quickly. In fact, it's slowing down. It's plateauing, sort of. The number's just not changing dramatically. This is the thing that people like to tell me in the library world all the time. They're like, yeah, we gave everybody in Africa a cell phone, a smartphone, and now they're all like trading crops using their smartphones, and really we just need to skip computers, give everyone a smartphone. You'll learn it because it's a phone. It's not hard like, I know, right? It's not hard like a computer. And we'll just use smartphones, and that'll be the, what's it called when you skip the, yeah, we'll leapfrog over, you know, the computer part of this technology, and we'll go straight from phone service to smartphone service. People will just learn it because it's a phone, right? Everybody knows how to use a phone. So again, back into sort of smartphone. This is like Arbitron survey kinds of stuff. Looking at who owns smartphones. Now, maybe there's some thing where we give everyone a smartphone and kick them out of the, kick them out of the nest, and they'll figure it out. But realistically, if we're looking at who has them, it's 25, 35-year-old people. Older folks, 6%. Like, smartphone technology is just not giving you that kind of penetration. But the numbers here aren't as important as why a smartphone is not a computer that's on the internet. Things like net neutrality. When I say net neutrality, do you guys kind of know what that means?
Yes.
Yes, no, maybe? Okay. Net neutrality basically means if I'm the person who's your service provider, I just give you the internet. Now, theoretically, if I'm Comcast, what I would like to do is give you my content slightly more quickly, more directly, more easily, or more readily, so that if you did a search, you'd find my stuff more quickly, just favoring my content. Theoretically, in the world today, I'm not allowed to do that on the general internet. If I'm Comcast and I give you cable, I'm not allowed to prioritize my traffic over somebody else's traffic. However, if I'm AT&T and you have my phone, technically, because I'm owning the towers and whatever, there's a lot more of a gray area about how much I am and am not allowed to prioritize my own traffic. Not a big deal, hobby horse of some people, worth thinking about. But what it means is if I'm AT&T and I'm your internet service provider, I don't have to be as neutral about the content that goes to and from your phone. The other things that are really important about smartphones is bandwidth caps. Smartphones have them, internet, not so much. You guys, at school you don't have them, but at home, bandwidth caps, people with satellite have to deal with this. You get like 3 gigs a month and then either you're done or they throttle your service. Now, keep in mind, if you're watching a movie over Netflix, that's like a gig of traffic going down your pipe from start to finish. So 3 gigs a month, that's 3 movies and nothing else on the internet. Kind of a problem, right? So a smartphone has limitations. Oh, plus a smartphone costs whatever, 70 bucks a month, 40 bucks a month, 30, I don't know. What's the cheapest smartphone plan you can get?
Around 40 or so.
Yeah, like around 40 or so, right? And so that's a very different planet than theoretically $10 Comcast internet, et cetera, et cetera. And then our last thing, which we talk about a lot in the library world, people don't want to learn, so heck with them, right? I don't care. You don't want to learn to drive a car? Fine. You don't want to learn to get on the internet? Fine, fine, fine. So again, looking at Pew and some of their numbers, okay, you're not online. What would need to happen for you to get online? And the biggest thing that would need to happen for people to get online is someone would need to help them. And unfortunately, we're a whole bunch of dorky do-gooders in the library. That's me, talking about me. Because a lot of times if you're in a community that doesn't have anybody who knows how to use this stuff, the answer is not ask your mom. The answer is not ask your kid. The answer is not ask your neighbor. I mean, everybody likes the ask a kid approach to it, but that doesn't always totally work. So people would need help. And so when you think about, well, who cares about this? I like to think about, you know, this administration compared to, say, the last administration is really like, they would really like to deliver you more content, government content, technology-wise. The reason they want to do this? A couple reasons, but number one is economies of scale, right? When we think about this in the library world, we think about it like mailing out newsletters, right? We got 1,000 people in our town, we mail out 1,000 newsletters, it's 44 cents a newsletter, right? Like, that's real money. If we've got 1,000 people in our town and we email out 1,000 newsletters, that's kind of fake money. It's not real money. We save 44 cents every person who gets email from us instead of print mail. So that's the public library world, but you want to know like who in the Obama world cares about this? The Internal Revenue Service. It's weird, right? Like you wouldn't necessarily think that, but every time you file taxes on the internet, that saves the IRS $2. So when you multiply that by the number of people who file their taxes, that's like a real number. It's not real like this multi-trillion-dollar deficit number is a real number, but it's a real number in that, you know, it saves the government money if you could just do the thing using the computer instead of online. The other thing is with your $2 that you save, you also get fewer errors with your taxes because there's not some poor person having to look at your scan tax machine, tax refund, tax forms, and type in the numbers. Fewer errors, saves money, whatever. But the thing about the IRS is they can't force you to do your taxes online because they're not allowed to. So they have to buddy up with TurboTax and do a whole bunch of stuff like this. So we need to sort of address the reasons that people aren't doing this because we can do things like save the government money, which is weird, but important. So, quickie genuine option interlude, and I'll talk about libraries kind of briefly, and then a few people have questions. I'm sort of interested in philosophy in addition to some of this stuff. So there's like William James, who was really, wrote a thing called The Will to Believe, and was really interested in how do you motivate people to change their lives. He was interested in faith and religion, but I'm interested in like, well, how do you motivate someone who wants to get on the internet or doesn't want to get on the internet? One of the things that I often say about both living in Vermont and getting on the internet is like if you live in Vermont, often you live in Vermont for a reason. Like there's people who live there who just didn't leave, but you have to kind of decide that you want to live somewhere if they've got 6 months of winter. Or you have to decide that you want to live somewhere where it's really rural and there's not a lot of internet and there's not a lot of jobs. So a lot of times people are there because they think it's beautiful or you know, they like Bernie Sanders or like whatever the stuff is, but usually they've made a conscious choice. One of the things that we're finding about people who are, people who spend a lot of time online, internet people, they often do that for a reason, and at this point in 2011, if you're not on the internet, usually you had to make a choice to do that. Like it's almost easier to get online by accident because somebody's like, hey, try out Facebook, or hey, you know, if you have an email, we can whatever. One of the things we find about older people in our communities, the thing that gets them online, grandkids. And like they're just motivated. They're into it. They're like, I don't even care. Email, Mozilla, Godzilla, I don't even care. Like I'm motivated to get there because there's something that I want. So a lot of people have to tell themselves a story about why there's nothing that they want there, which is becoming increasingly more and more difficult to do. So in the library world, and in the philosophy world, William James talks about this genuine option. How do you make people want to make a choice? And you know, his line is, if you want to change your life, you have to start immediately, do it flamboyantly. And what he says is, in order to make people change their minds, you have to give them an option that is live, something that they'll actually do. You have to force them to do it. You have to give them no non-option. And you have to make that decision momentous. You have to make it change something in their life. So you have to see a picture of your grandbaby versus not seeing them. You have to, you know, make a friend on Facebook. I mean, in the library world, a lot of times we talk about, like, what does the internet do for you? Well, it can help you maybe get laid and get paid. Like maybe you could meet a friend, or maybe you could get a job. And often those are the things that motivate you. Occasionally I say this at conferences and people are like, please tell Jessamyn. Getting laid is not a swear. And so you have to think about how to motivate people to do that. Those two motivations are strong, but if you've already got a partner and you already have a job, it's slightly more difficult. And one of the things we have to think about in the library world is often we're not just talking about library patrons. Like I said, everybody who works at my library is somebody who doesn't have the internet at home, which is weird. And I spend a lot of time jumping up and down being like, really? Really? And they just sort of look at me like, yes. So you have to think about making technology a genuine option for the people behind the desk in our world, in my world, as well as the people on the other side. So some good news about the library world in terms of technology, and I'll just talk to you a little bit about what our stuff is and then wrap up. One of the things that we've been finding lately is often you can get money for digital projects. This is sort of one of my favorite Connecticut libraries have this wonderful sort of treasure of blah, 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 blah. But often you can get money to do technology projects from people like IMLS, from people like big granting institutions, from people like the National Institute of Health will give you, or the National Libraries of Medicine in conjunction with NIH, to teach people how to use health information. And you can use some of the money you get off of these in the library world for computers and for people who know how to use them, and for classes so that the people in that big chunk of the pie chart have someone who can help them. Other people like the American Library Association can do things like this. Let's teach people how to use their money. And one of the things that we found, and this was sort of the flooding situation in Vermont, when stuff flooded in Vermont, the Vermont Emergency Management Agency had a bunch of servers in a big government building on the first floor that was under 3 feet of water, which meant that the Vermont Emergency Management Agency functionally had no emergency management capability, which was a little embarrassing, and oh, now we all know better, and whoop, is our face red? But one of the things that we found was that people, if they knew what to do, could do things like get on Facebook and ask, is that road open? Is this road open? Is this other road open? And Facebook, as much as I kind of like to make fun of it, and I do also use it all the time, became the place where people who already knew how to use technology could coordinate with stuff like this, especially because they could do it from their phones. If they had a smartphone, again, if you're already there, this solves a problem for you. If you're not already there, you're probably not going to learn to use Facebook so that you can figure out if Route 4 is open. And so there's a couple other things I'm just going to show you about what librarians are doing in this. This is just kind of like ping, 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 ping. Did everybody see these when they were up maybe in South Station, like Sony Reader, like sexier than a librarian?
There's a really funny,
What?
there's a really funny signs there.
Well, because they really need to like get your attention really quick when you're like, I'm going to work. But there's a whole bunch of librarians who are kind of deciding that one of the things we need to do, in addition to having classes and doing a whole bunch of stuff, is changing the layout of kind of sort of the environment that people are dealing with. So a lot of us have side jobs in addition to our real jobs, and this is J.C. Griffey, who's a librarian. He works at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, and one of the things that he's done, in addition to just being the librarian at the library, is written this sort of guide to like, what the heck is an ebook? Right? Because if you don't know what email is, your chances of understanding an ebook are slim to none, right? Because you've got to understand an ebook reader. You've got to understand an ebook. You've got to understand digital rights management, which is confusing even to us. You've got to understand delivery mechanisms. You've got to understand why, you know, I just learned that I can make a copy of a file, but now you're telling me I can't make a copy of a file? I don't understand the world. And so librarians are setting up methods of talking to other librarians about, you know, what the stuff is and what the what is. This is fairly interesting. We have a thing called library renewal, which is trying to beat the Netflix for libraries, so that instead of having to do this crazy download a book, put it on your e-reader, it vanishes in 7 days, you've got to make sure you have Adobe Editions installed, blah, 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 blah. It would just be one group that deals with content for all libraries, because one of the things that's really weird about libraries is we're very decentralized. So the states all get funding differently, and a lot of the individual libraries all get funding differently. So we buy more books than pretty much anyone else as an institution. You know, like Harry Potter, like we bought those. And like Dan Brown, we bought those. Like, libraries are buying huge numbers of books and we have an immense amount of purchasing power, but we're decentralized, which is usually awesome, right? Problem when you're trying to get bulk discounts, purchase licenses for digital content. These people are trying to do that. This was, you guys, this is probably inside baseball for you guys, but HarperCollins is a publisher that distributes ebooks. And, you know, ebook, it's a digital file, right? You can, like, have it, make a copy, whatever. If you're a library who wants to distribute HarperCollins books, HarperCollins made an arbitrary number and said after you distribute it 26 times, you can't distribute it anymore. We just decided. So all the things you paid for licenses for now expire after 26 checkouts. And a lot of libraries were kind of like, that seems wrong. And a lot of people who understood technology were making the faces you guys are making, which is like, that's crazy. Like, they just totally made that up just to be jerks. And so we had some people who started a petition and who are trying to send a message to HarperCollins that we kind of understand this maybe better than you think we do, and maybe you can't do that thing you want to do. And it's up on change.org. It's got 69,000 signatures on it right now, and we're hoping something will actually sort of change. Cornell University Library, big organization, big institution, they scan content, they put it online, they have digital archives. One of the things you see in libraries a lot is when they scan something that's in the public domain, you know, it's from the 1850s, picture from the 1850s. They scan it, put it online, slap a copyright notice on it because they scanned it, so they own the scan technically, and they could decide to copyright it, to not copyright it. A lot of libraries sell that content, so it's useful for them. Cornell decided to make a choice. How about if we just make all our public domain reproductions public domain? Now these are just like a couple people who work at the library deciding that this is something that's important. The only way that they can understand this and make these decisions and make these sort of pro-sharing decisions, because we really are like gung-ho on sharing, is if they understand the technology landscape, and this makes it easier for everybody. My favorite thing about Wikipedia is that if you show somebody Wikipedia, you can say, and you're allowed to use all this content for anything. You can try selling it to somebody if you want to. Good luck, but like, that's kind of neat, and it makes it a lot easier to explain to students, it makes it a lot easier to explain to patrons, and it makes a lot more sense in sort of an actual digital environment. And University of Michigan did an orphan works project, which is actually coming under a little bit of scrutiny lately, but an orphan work is something that's technically under copyright, but we don't know who owns it, and it's a thing. So like if there's a book and it's under copyright, and I want to use it in a talk, a movie, a thing, I would normally contact the copyright owner and say, can I use this? And they'd either say yes or no or pay me. But there's a whole bunch of stuff where we can't reach the person who owns the thing, and these are called orphan works. They're under copyright, but nobody owns the copyright. University of Michigan has been trying to track down who owns them, and then with the, they work with Google, they do one of those like scanning projects, make the scans of the stuff that they can't find the copyright holders of available because they don't know who they are. And then they say, you know, if it's yours, just let us know and we'll hide it again. But otherwise, we don't know. We're pro-sharing. And then my favorite, and again, if you guys live in Massachusetts, you can get Boston Public Library cards. And Boston Public Library does this really interesting thing where they scan books. So you scan a book like this one, Love, Death, and the Ladies Drill Team. I'm actually named after an author who has the same name as me. This is not my book. I was not actually alive in 1955. Scan the book, put the book on the shelf, circulate the digital copy one at a time. So like one at a time. So technically, they're only circulating the book. But realistically, anybody who understands copyright knows that this is kind of a envelope-pushing thing. And Boston Public Library, and they check it out through Open Library, which is just openlibrary.org, where they have lots and lots of books available for checkout. And they basically just got up in front of a room of people and said, our lawyers think this is defensible.
That's kind of interesting, especially because of the company that recently tried to do something extremely similar for movies, where they actually had they rented out DVD players and basically said that they were going to stream from those DVD players to people's homes one at a time, and they got sued and lost.
I'm familiar with that. Also, I was just talking to Dee about the UCLA streaming thing, where UCLA was streaming content to their students, and the content rights holder said you can't do that, and then UCLA said we think we can, and there was just a lawsuit, and it just got settled. Kind of exciting. But yeah, Boston Public Library is basing this on the fact that they think people will not sue a public library.
Yeah.
And they have written across their door, you know, free to all. All the content's free to all, which means the digital content in addition to the regular content. And lastly, my library has a dorky blog. It's not even mine, but we did this strategic planning. Strategic planning, I don't know if you guys ever go to these meetings, you have pieces of paper, you write things on them, you tape them up on the wall, you say we're going to do this and maybe do this and whatever. And what they decided to do was take pictures of the strategic plan stuff and put it up on this dorky little blog so that everyone in the town who didn't necessarily go to the meeting could see it. And my favorite thing about this is just this part at the bottom where the public librarian was like, hey man, if I can do this, you guys can do this. And everyone knows that Amy doesn't have the internet at home. And they're like, oh, okay. So lastly, this is just a friend of mine's kid, and I talk a lot about the Gates Foundation because the Gates Foundation came through every state in the country and gave computers to libraries that didn't have computers. And in Vermont, it was kind of the best and worst thing that happened because we have libraries now that have computers that actually, if they'd been left to their own devices to make those choices, might not have decided to get computers. Big deal. But I think it also gave us computers, and it also gave us a scapegoat where now people are like, "Rah, Gates Foundation, rah, Windows PCs, rah," you know, a whole bunch of stuff, and it didn't necessarily give them the empowerment part of learning to use technology, the empowerment divide, which I think a lot of our libraries are kind of grappling with. I don't know if you guys saw this from Occupy Wall Street. This is one of my favorite pictures. I got this probably 100 times on Facebook. This is, you may or may not have seen this picture. And there's two things that are really interesting about this. One of which is, if you know anything about librarians, you'll know that like we're out marching for everything all the time, so it's not strictly true what's going on here. This lady actually is a school librarian from New York, and you know, my feeling, if I'm sort of waxing poetical for a second, is that what's going on with digital content, and especially the digital divide, is really a time when we're all kind of out there agitating on our hobby horses for getting this stuff working out, and we're finding more and more. I mean, I really think like that you're not going to sue the public library is like the strongest sort of direction we have. But we're agitating for sort of better and improved access to scholarship and content for patrons and faculty, and especially just for us, I guess, for all of us. So, you know, I would say messed up on the one hand, but on the other hand, messed up and hopefully improving. And I have this up on the door of my office at home. So, thanks. Sorry I ran into dinner time for you guys. But if people have questions or links to sources, or if you want to email me, I'm available on the internet.
Just quickly, I was curious to see, with all of the slides you did have, park charts and all that. For the folks who were, you know, just saying, no way, no how, I will ever get on the internet, there didn't seem to be any information about the age demographic for any of them.
About the what, sorry?
The age demographics.
Well,
Because I know given anyone who is 25 or under, they would give, at least all the ones that I've met who've not been from, you know, the more educated
sure.
areas, they're dying to be on the internet. It is the older crowd. And I see the evolution in waves as far as wanting to be on. But I didn't see that correlation with
Well, it's interesting because I think on the one hand, there's some truth to that. One of the things, the people who've done like the hugest study who don't appear to have a dog in the fight is the IRS did this big longitudinal study a couple of years ago. And one of the things that they found was, you know, definitely like the 25 and under set, they're just like, yeah, great, whatever. Like they just want to be online, period, don't care how, money's not as much of an option. But really after about 25 to 35, the sort of do we want it, you know, drops way, way off. And like, I find that surprising personally because whatever. I think of anybody younger than me as like, the young people. But, for people who basically didn't have the internet in high school, who graduated from high school, didn't really have the internet, like, not didn't have it, but didn't have it in any real functional way, didn't have the fast, spiffy web, and then didn't go to college, they're still in that group of don't care, which is weird because, again, like my feeling is exactly what your feeling
But
is.
they pay for cable.
I know. They
So
pay for
it's
cable,
just weird that-
and a lot of times they pay for smartphones, but the internet hasn't yet fallen. I think that's one of the reasons you see all these bundle deals that like Comcast and other people try to do, because they want you to get on the internet because once they have a certain degree of market penetration, they can start delivering certain content, which they kind of can't before that. One of the things, just one second, one of the things that is so interesting in Vermont is that Verizon, who used to be the DSL provider, basically left. Like they made a deal with the state that they'd get 80% of the state online by 2010. And in 2008, they were like, sorry, and basically left Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine, and sold all their lines to Fairpoint, who's an adorable, struggling company who isn't really big enough to manage and handle that, although they're approaching the 80% line now in 2012. And so one of the things that's so weird is in northern New England, there's so little impetus for building out infrastructure because it's just so totally not worth it. And part of that infrastructure, and this is so weird that I see all the time, is marketing, is the why you need it part of the whole thing.
That's another thing, I wonder if there's a regional cultural difference, because I'm from New Mexico,
Uh-huh.
and the whole rural medicine, rural everything, the farther west you go, at least in my experience.
Sure.
Of course, it's still limited.
Sure.
There's definitely, you want it, you need it. In New England, it's make do or do without.
I really wonder about that as well because, also New Mexico has some of the same challenges we have, which is that it's mountainous and it's difficult to get line of sight. Like Oklahoma, everybody's on the internet in Oklahoma because it's very easy to get everyone on the internet in Oklahoma because they can do point of sight WiMAX if they can't do DSL cable or whatever. New Mexico, no. Like Connecticut, everybody's on the internet in Connecticut. Massachusetts, Eastern Mass, yes. Western Mass, no. Northern New England, no. Maine, no. And I do sometimes wonder if it is that kind of like, we've been fine without it. And then the question is that our job in the library or in the culture to overcome that? And that's what I go to bed thinking about. Like, how much is this my responsibility? Because if people don't want it, they don't want it, right? Like, that's their business. Sort of. Maybe. I mean, I don't really know.
I was kind of interested in the less than 25-year-olds, kind of speaking about them and how they adopt it. Doesn't that contradict the idea that the older people will die out? Because if all of the under 25 are set to move on, so then it would be 45 years in the future when those 25-year-olds and below hit the average age of life. So I guess I'm thinking, looking to the future, if we say that less than 25-year-olds have
Sure.
largely adopted the internet,
Sure.
and we think that trend will continue, then 45 years from now, the whole population will have adopted the internet.
Yeah.
Is this expected, I guess, is my question?
I think what I mean is this current generation of old people dying will not solve the
Okay.
problem. But I think also you're going to still have the problem of immigration churn in
Right.
urban areas. But I think the problem is going to be really different 20 or 30 years from now because I also think what's going to happen slowly is people are going to get kicked out of the nest. States are going to basically say, you can't file a paper tax form, get out of here. And people are going to have to either not file taxes or, figure out the internet. I mean, I teach people how to use the internet, and I'm always like, what are they motivated by? What are they motivated by? And it used to be email. Most of the time now it's Facebook. But if it's not Facebook, it's I need a job or I need to apply for unemployment. And the state of Vermont's basically get out of the nest. You have to fill out this stuff on the internet, which is unkind, I think, but you can sort of see where they're coming from because it's so much easier for them to manage digital information than a bunch of freaking forms or a phone tree system.
Doesn't that also mean that people above a certain age don't have any kind of investment in wanting to get on the internet?
I think the investment thing is, I think it's that they don't have none, but I think the thing things that motivate them, there's a much smaller set of motivators. And a lot of times that kind of stuff trickles up from younger people who are like, come on, do it for whatever. One of the things that surprises me the most in some of the research that I've done is the number of people who got on the internet and then got off the internet when whatever the thing was that was getting them on the internet was no longer around, whether they didn't have a household member who was on and so that person left, or when they couldn't afford broadband anymore so they just didn't have it. Like the number of people who would come to drop-in time and be like, well, I have a computer, and I'm like, okay, like what's going on? And they're like, well, I tried something, 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 story, something went wrong, turned the computer off, and that was 2 months ago, and they finally decided to sort of get back online. The thing that I find is really kind of weird to me is the number of people who just have some sort of block that is not, that is made up of emotions pretty much entirely. And I don't mean that in a bad or unkind way, but I mean, we all hear about like, you know, people who have social anxiety or whatever the thing is that keeps you from going out to the bar or whatever. And I feel like there's a technology anxiety factor.
I get that. I get that impression from my family in Austria actually, because we actually taught all of them how to use computers, and we started emailing them, and they emailed us back. But after like half a year, they just gave up because they thought it was too complicated.
Yeah, it totally happens. Now, do you have any like electronic interact? Do you Skype with them? A lot of times Skype is like the game changer for people.
We showed them digital devices, and they thought, hey, look, this is so cool, new generation stuff, but it's way too complicated for us.
Like Skype on an iPad.
Does anybody have a baby yet?
Actually, yes. One of the
Because that's what I'm always curious about.
My aunt actually has some of the same problems that my grandparents do, and my aunt has two younger children that are like 7 years old or something. So
other two, they're not cute anymore.
Right. No, I mean literally like it's the baby factor. But yeah, I mean I'm always curious about that, especially with people who are otherwise sort of smart and plugged in and whatever. There's I mean, we call it techno-stress in the library world, but that word doesn't really mean anything. But it's the feeling that you're pressured between someone who's saying you have to do this and someone who's saying, I need you to be competent, and your own lack of ability that people, especially of a certain age, you're 50 years old, you don't want to learn a new thing. I mean, many people do, but some people don't. And so there's that kind of, I'm just not interested. And they develop elaborate workarounds, or they have a kid, or they have a friend. But like Geek Squad coming to your house is basically teaching a whole generation of people that they don't need to learn how to fix their computers, or that that's something that a professional can do. And Lord love Geek Squad, they'll then stay in a job forever. But I come from the like, no, you can totally do this. Like I spend an awful lot of time only cheerleading. Like cheerleading and selectively ignoring. Like we have people at drop-in time, and there's 4 or 5 people, and the rule is always you have to come with a project. So people show up and they have a thing, and they'll start doing it, and then I'll help someone else with the thing while that person theoretically is working on it. But sometimes that person hits a wall. And a lot of times I feel if I wait a couple extra minutes before wandering over there, they may actually figure it out on their own, but they wouldn't otherwise. It's like you don't want to be rude, like you don't want to blow people off. But you also want to be like, I really think this is something you can do. Like I used to say, oh, that's easy, and now I don't say easy anymore because people react to it. But I'm like, it's not complicated. I think you can follow the steps. Let's do the thing. But it is like this weird, challenging problem because I'm like, there's no logical reason, because I'm like this total nerd, There's no logical reason this is true. And they're like, but I just can't. And you're like, ah. So yeah, it's a really interesting and intractable problem. Thank you very much for all of your time and attention. I'm so sorry people got hungry.
Thanks, Jessamyn.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.